The bombing of Pearl Harbor, 12/7/41. On December 6, 1941, I went to Lu'u'lu'ulei to spend a quiet weekend with friends who lived on the Army post. The morning of December 7th, we went on an early hike. After returning to the quarters, we were eating breakfast when all of a sudden there were 10 long sirens. I soon learned that was the signal for every man to leave his quarters and report for duty at his job on the post. I recall my friend jumped up from the table and left without saying a word to anyone. Shortly thereafter, the telephone rang, and it was an officer calling from Fort Shafter who asked if we would contact the officer in charge there at the Lu'u'lu'ulei ad building. He said he had been trying to reach him but had not been able to do so. I immediately volunteered to go to the ad building, and upon reaching there, I relayed the message to the officer on duty. When I returned to my friend's quarters, which was only a short distance from the ad building, I saw 7 planes overhead, flying toward Pearl Harbor in the formation of a V. We've been having blackouts and practice alerts since the previous May, so no one was too concerned about the planes overhead. However, by the time I got back to the quarters, I could see the insignia on the planes and the pilots in the planes. Wow. At the time, there were only 2 radio stations on the island. The one was playing music, and the other was asking every serviceman to report to his post immediately. Lu'u'lu'ulei is where the ammunition is stored underground for the whole island. A railroad track leads to the entrance of the underground depot, and a railroad car on the track made it impossible for any ammunition to be gotten out and delivered to the gun sites on the island. I'm sure many people listening to the radio that morning thought the message for all to report for duty was part of the island's practice alert. That is, until the radio station was asking for all doctors and all nurses to make themselves available for the vicious attack by the Japanese Navy. The station kept repeating, "This is not a practice alert. We are being attacked by the Japanese." My friend and I, both government workers, decided to head back to the office in Honolulu. As we rounded the bend, there lay Pearl Harbor. One ship was already exposing its keel. It's hard to describe the scene with all the black smoke and fire shooting from all directions. As was the custom, many battleships were lined up in a row so that one could walk from one ship to another. Now you could see nothing but smoke and fire. We saw a Japanese plane drop a bomb into the stack of a hospital ship. Damage done to a ship at the entrance of the harbor prevented any other ship from getting out of the harbor. No, we didn't lie down in the ditch at the side of the road during the bombing. We were too stunned by it all. We just stood there and watched, unable to believe it was really happening to our Navy and to Hickam Field next door. We proceeded on to Honolulu, a distance of about 7 miles, wondering what would happen next and fearing there might be another group of planes on the way to Hawaii. Back in Honolulu, I saw a couple of trucks filled with dead Army and Navy personnel en route to a temporary burial cemetery near the Palais. Later, we were told they were buried at Red Hill Cemetery near Pearl Harbor. We reported to work at the Corps of Engineer office on the 7th floor of the Young Hotel, which is in the center of downtown Honolulu, only 2 or 3 blocks from the Aloha Tower, where all the cruise ships stopped. I was secretary to Colonel Theodore Wyman, district engineer in charge of the Corps of Engineers in Honolulu. Mattresses were thrown down by desks, and when we could work no longer, we rested a bit as best we could on the mattresses. Even though I lived at the Blaisdell Hotel only 2 blocks from the office at the Young Building, I didn't get home for the next 3 days. After that, part of the office was moved to Punahou University so that the Corps of Engineers of C of E would be able to operate in the event the Young Hotel building was bombed. I moved to Punahou with Colonel Wyman and his immediate staff. The first visitors of Punahou to see Colonel Wyman were General Short and Admiral Nimitz, heads of the Army and Navy. Their visit was to place the blame of the Pearl Harbor attack on the C of E, since the aircraft warning stations from Hawaii, no strategic outlying islands in the Pacific, were not completed as scheduled. schedule. They argued with Colonel Wyman, had they been completed, we would have been able to detect the planes before they reached Hawaii. The truth is that the aircraft warning stations had not been completed because the necessary material had not been received from the U.S. mainland, even though it had been requested many times. General Short and Admiral Nimitz were hoping to place the blame for the attack on Colonel Wyman, who had come up through the ranks and was not a graduate of West Point, as was General Short. Politics is a rough game, and they succeeded by getting Colonel Wyman released and assigning as district engineer Colonel Lyman, the first native Hawaiian to graduate from West Point. I stayed on as Colonel Lyman's secretary until I received word in April of '42 of the death of my brother, an Air Force pilot, at which time I returned to Ohio. And that's it.
And you wrote that to a Chinese student?
Yes, he was here, living here, and he had to write a paper. He was a senior, and I was in Florida, so I scribbled this out, and he put it on his VCR or whatever.
Yeah. That must evoke a tremendous amount of emotions when you read that. I mean, just your...
Yeah, it just takes me way back. Mm-hmm. I want to thank you for doing all of this.
I want to thank you.